thank you for that. And I've too read Pezdir's stuff, and it's terrific. I hope that that book and Igor Omerz's his material, I hope that that will be published in Croatian quite soon, because we being in Croatia, we need to know about the experiences of other countries, both within the former Yugoslavia and outside it, in order, I think, to grasp our own experience. I think particularly profound about that because it's true of all of us as human beings. We need to interact with other people's experiences in order to assess our own. And communism, as we have discussed, its aims are always the same. Its priorities are always the same. Its methods are broadly the same when they can get away with it. But how you deal with the consequences of it, there's been an enormous variety of ways of dealing with it and ways of avoiding dealing with it. We haven't got anybody from Poland here, but it's my strong impression that the Poles have invested more effort and investigated far more closely the secret police archives, in particular, of course, establishing those who are what we call suradnici, collaborators, than have been done elsewhere. And it's worth remembering that here the number of collaborators, as far as we know, to them was largely destroyed, as Vishnu Stadeshina said. I'm not convinced that it was all destroyed. I've never really believed that documents are very often destroyed at all. And who knows whether they might not be lurking around somewhere in the Ministry of the Interior or somewhere else. And certainly some of these old communists, they have their own stores of material. And in Belgrade, the UDBA reports, and UDBA took over from OSNA as the main secret police. The military secret police was KOS, but all of these Republican secret police operations, again, as far as I know, and I think this is true, that they had to send in weekly or at least regular reports, condensed reports, regarding their operations. Now, in the archives here in Croatia, you cannot find the operational material of OSNA and UDBA. What you have to use is you have to use the personal files of people who were prosecuted and so on, or there are some personal files of collaborators, suradnici. Interestingly, they're normally called saradnici because, significantly, as all Croats will immediately understand, the jargon of the secret police here was all drawn from Serbia, as many other things of dubious origin were drawn from Serbia, and particularly as regards the secret police and the oppression. But the number of these files that actually is available there is very small. Some of them have been weeded, but some of them, I mean, we know that certain people were important collaborators, but their files are not there, and nobody knows where they are. So we live with a very imperfect idea, even after the documents have largely been opened, and they have largely been opened here, and until I think there is further exploration of archives in Belgrade, and of course the opening of party archives in Moscow, we are not going to have as much information as we really need. Now, the archives in Moscow, as you may know, were for several years opened under Yeltsin and then closed. And that Vladimir Bukovsky, went to those archives and, I say secretly, but probably he bribed somebody as well, he photoed a very large amount of the material and took it out. But beyond that, and beyond a certain amount of other stuff that's leaked out, again, we know very little. For example, the campaign against the Stepinac and the Catholic Church and so on was clearly, at least up until 1948, a Stalin-oriented operation. It would have been true in Slovenia too, but we don't know about those connections. We just have to speculate about it. Well, what I'd like to do really obviously now is to just throw the discussion open, and perhaps in the course of their discussion, if our speakers at any point have ideas about how we in Croatia, they don't know about all of our experiences and so on, but how we actually also can educate, and I am talking about educate rather than indoctrinate people about the realities of communism. I mentioned the need for our own little house of terror here, how that can be done. On that score, by the way, the House of Terror in Budapest is very dramatic for many reasons, beautifully designed and so on. And, of course, the history of the building, this horrific history of the building, also helps. But you have there both the Arrow Cross and you have the Communist Party. And there are some very dramatic pictures which show you, of course, that these people behaved with equal bestiality as totalitarians do. And indeed that there was very considerable similarity between them. But, well, we can't necessarily have a complete replica of that. And I don't think we need it because, again, as some of our guests may not know, at the Jasenovac site, which was a site it was a killing camp, not just a work camp, as some people say. It was a work camp in which a very large number of people died, Serbs, Jews, and others. But there is a very well-funded institution there, which is indeed producing, the figures and the names are still disputed and so on, but is constantly producing material about this. But we have absolutely nothing which is doing the same sort of thing for those who are victims of communism. And I think that in logic alone, we really ought to have such an institution. Well, anyway, on that note, I open the floor, and I'm sure that some of you will have questions to ask our speakers.
I would like to thank all of you for your very interesting presentations. Question for Mr. Joch primarily. How do Czechs as well as Czech politicians perceive, maybe it's a taboo topic, about the expulsion of Germans from Sudetenland?
It's still a sensitive issue, but the consensus of most Czech democratic politicians was that was a very, there are two aspects. First, no one democratic politician or citizen disputes that the crimes committed on German civilians during the expulsion were cruel and criminal and cannot be defended in any way, must be condemned. Secondly, there are still divided opinions whether it was a prudent and just move, how to secure ethnically homogeneous Czechoslovakia in those times, or whether it was a collective punishment and completely unacceptable. If some of those Sudeten Germans were guilty of war crimes, of collaborating with Gestapo, they had to be punished individually, but had not to be expelled as a whole community. This second opinion is gaining ground. However, it's perceived as a horrible event in reaction to other horrible events committed against Czechs, and now we can do nothing about that, just to apologize to each other and to forgive each other. There is a line in Czech law that property stolen by communists on the day of communist coup February 25 of 1948, those properties should be returned. So there is a consensus that properties of former Sudeten Germans, former Czechoslovak citizens, should not be returned. That not all injustices of the past should be remedied. And now the position of Sudeten German organizations of Landsmannschaft are that they do not demand properties back that would poison relationships, but they demand an official apology that it was a mistake, it was injustice against German civilians done by the Czechoslovak state, and many democratic politicians are ready to say that. And usually when there is a Landsmannschaft meeting in Bavaria, at least one Czech minister of Czech government addresses them personally, and the form of address is "my fellow compatriots," and that's the applause line, of course, from Sudeten Germans. So now it's perceived to be an issue of the past, not to be reopened again. But the consensus is that if something like that happens today, the government expels the whole ethnic group from the territory inhabited by the ethnic group for hundreds of years, it would be a crime against humanity. But still there are Czechs who claim that was the prudent decision to do after the horrible crimes of World War II. But those are becoming a minority. That's the situation in the Czech Republic now.
Thank you for the presentations. Something that occurs to me, though, is that a lot of the work that's been done on European memory and consciousness so far has been done by people who have lived experience of communism, who grew up in it, or, you know, in the case of the Prague Declaration, were resistant to it. How do we appeal to a new generation that has no experience at all of communism and, in fact, in some ways glorifies it?
I will pass the mic to other panelists, but my own suggestion is there should be a movie like Schindler's List about crimes of communism. That would help. And Schindler's List is a definitive movie about horrors of Holocaust, in my view. No better could be directed again. Unfortunately, there is no such a movie about crimes of communism. The closest to that is the movie Katyń by Polish movie director Andrzej Wajda. That's the closest.
It's a very good question. Thank you very much, because we see in the House of Terror Museum, and we always have this question, that how do you educate those kids who didn't have any memory about what happened to the past. And the first thing, this building. As you saw at my presentation, that more than 7 million people visited it. It's always full with students, not just from Hungary, but abroad too. So it's some kind of must-we visit. This is the first one. And I think this is not the precise quote from Ronald Reagan, who said that we are always one generation past from freedom and democracy. So we need always to work on it, from like these kind of buildings, with the education to show these peoples that what happened. And the museum is, as I mentioned in my presentation, that we try to drop out those kind of orthodox museum elements, and we say that we would like to if you come to our museum, you see, how can I say it, you see you have a drama in yourself, feelings, emotions, and if you have these kind of emotions, you will understand what happened. We have a lot of oral history interviews with those who survived the communist and the Nazi regimes too. And when an old guy talked to you that what they did to him and crying, everybody's shocking. And in the museum, as I mentioned, there's a prison cell, reconstructed prison cells, because the word it's important. Reconstruction prison cells, because after the '56 revolution, the communists, the secret police, torn up everything and tried to cancel the whole things. And when you go to the basement, there's a guy who was helped the executions, and he talked 2 or 3 minutes long how it looked like when they hanged up somebody in the prison cells. So these kind of shocking elements must be a good thing. And education, or what I mentioned, the first Orban government was who said that we need memorial days for these kind of events, communism, Holocaust, and so on, to be strong enough to know what happened with us in the future, in our past. Because if we know what happened to us in our past, we can. This is the main element for a country, for a nation.
So when I'm talking with young people, I ask them simple questions. What do you know about your family? In Slovenian case, families don't talk about their what they are. What do you know about good guys? What are you proud of? What are your family secrets? And I work with one group a year, and they were all telling super interesting stories in 1 year. The second question, what revolution are you for? Are you for bloody revolution? So you have a class, you have to kill 1 or 2 now, select if you want bloody revolution. And of course, the third question is to whom you will marry, because if you don't know the answers of first 2 questions, the marriage is the most dangerous thing in the world.
I wonder whether I could ask Roman and Jože, what has, I've been to see your museum, your former museum. I wonder whether you could tell us what the priorities were for you in dealing with that museum in Slovenia. And also, do you have a sort of museum of communism in the Czech Republic or Slovakia? And whether you two could tell us about your experiences and your views.
As I mentioned, we saw Drago Jančar has led the first project, The Dark Side of the Moon. In 2008, I have renewed this room, Slovenia 5460, with the elements of, I would say, of course, but a new mentality of museum community in Slovenia is at the time under this repressive system is at the time far away. But I think we have a super interesting history, super century, and all elements we have developed in research, not only Masquerading but also others, are good starting point for many things. But the artistic community in Slovenia is something that is not. That is very progressive. That is running away from history, running away from essential matters of life. But let's say so, be patient. When there was 100 years from First World War on, so 1418, Slovenia has a cultural revolution at the end. So let's say it was all Austro monarchy was always jail of nation. Now it was birthplace of nation. King or Kaiser Karl was at once friendly to Slovenes. That Slovenian units in Austrian army are our units. Now we have erected first monuments in Ukraine, in Poland, in Galicia. So history is coming. Democracy is working. Without Republic of Slovenia, we could not talk about things we are talking these days. So simple.
We have no such an impressive museum like House of Terror in Budapest. There is one private, small, commercial a museum of communism which focuses on 70s and the 80s, on the dull and gray life in those times. So there are cans of food from those times, or some consumer goods, and and beds and chairs from the 70s and 80s. So it looks the grayness of the life in the so-called normalization after suppression of Prague Spring in 1968. There is an government-funded institution called Institute for the Study of Totalitarian Regimes, which explores archives. There is an oral history project there. They publish materials, but mostly written materials, no movies, documentary or other. There is another private initiative called the Memory of the Nation, which makes tapes or oral history tapes with victims of both Nazism, surviving victims, and of communism. And once a year on November 17th, there is a huge award ceremony to those victims, 2 Slovaks, 2 Czechs, one a victim of Nazism, 3 victims of communism from different periods of communist regime. Last year there was the 5th hero suffering. It was a Ukrainian guy who started some human rights initiative in the 80s and was put in prison. But it is private initiative, so there is nothing such impressive as the House of Terror. Many movies, Czech movies, were made about crimes of communism, but they are not world-class quality. Some are funny, making fun from that. Some are quite horrible, picturing real stories, but they are not world-quality movies like Schindler's List. What helped really was the so-called lustration law or screening law, that collaborators and agents and officers of former communist secret police were banned from holding offices in government, like judges or positions on ministry. They could be elected to parliament. If voters decide to elect them to parliament, that's the right of the voters, but they cannot be deputy ministers or directors on ministries and judges. The list of, or some of those files have been destroyed, but most have been preserved. And they were fortunately leaked by somebody at the Ministry of Interior in the 90s to one journalist who published them all on internet. So we private citizens can check our closest relatives, whether they were collaborators or not, or anybody we know, we can check that on the internet. Then there was another step that those who were persecuted by the communist police could come to the archive and see their own files with the names of those persons who either collaborated with the police and gave information on them to the police. So they know who betrayed me, who I thought was my friend, but in fact he or she informed on me to the communist police. So there's a right of individual citizens. I cannot see the file of other citizens, but only my own. I had known because I was 18 when communism collapsed. And it's similar to Gauck Institute in former Eastern Germany, that people could see those files. And that's pretty all we have.
Well, actually, you introduced the question that I was going to ask anyway, which is actually this lustration, which isn't a word you use, I think, in Hungary when I said that to you, but it means cleaning. In other words, making people declare, at least, what their role was under the totalitarian state. And then, of course, following on that, whatever sanctions would be applied, not necessarily talking, or indeed mainly talking about criminal sanctions, but about the sanctions that are going to be applied as to whether you are going to be part of the new public life of the post-communist system. And Roman has told us that it seems to me that there was a much more effective and thorough attempt to do this. This is presumably throughout Czechoslovakia, because it was then Czechoslovakia. Yeah. Yes. don't believe there was any such system in Slovenia. And of course, there was no system here. And as I say, what you can get here, of course, as you no doubt all know, is that you can see your own files, and you can apply to see the personal files of somebody who's a member of your family. I don't know whether you have to be the heir or how close it is, but you can see those. It's just that these are not usually, well, they are sometimes revealing, and sometimes revealing of very unpleasant things, of course. Because I do know, for example, a friend of mine in England, great man, that his widow found that one of their closest friends had been an informer. And when we talk about informers, it's worth remembering, at least it must be so throughout the communist system, but it sounds to English speakers as if an informer is just somebody who comes along and whispers in the ear of some passing policeman. It isn't, if it means a collaborator. A collaborator under the system always has a code name, always has a controller, is not paid, can receive presents. Isn't it funny? They can receive presents, but they can't be paid. And they are agents. We're not talking about sort of just ordinary people. They are ordinary people, I suppose, in one sense. But these are people who have fully supported the oppressive regime. They're not people for whom, in my view, we should have any sympathy whatsoever. And I don't know whether, having said that, whether you could tell us a little bit what was done in Hungary to try to clean out the continuity with the old system among the personnel.
Yeah, like in the Czech Republic, we have a same institute which is called something like that, the Institute for the State Security Authorities Institute, where you can go there and you can see the same files like in Czech Republic, that you were old enough to lived under communism. You can see the files, what they got about you and wrote about you, reports, etc., etc., and you can find who was the informant about you, the system. This is one part. The second is we talk about it a lot. I can say that the Hungarians are really anti-communist. There was a pause maybe 2 or 3 years ago that how do you see the communists? Do you like the socialist ideas, the communist ideas? And under 10% who say that it's a fine idea, good thing, etc., etc. Mostly those are the ones who lived under, for example, the Kadar era. So we can see this kind of nostalgia on the communism, but it's in a low profile, low level. And what we have to do as a director for an institute to show these cases again and again and again, to not become a popular thing like what we see in the western part of the world, that it came back from in another clothes, another suit, in identity socialism.
Well, I'm going to draw this session now to an end, and I want to thank the speakers very warmly for their contributions. Time for a cup of coffee and a bun, and then we will return and listen to the words of Janez Janša.